Okay. So now we will start. So the very first block of MEG-14 is background studies. Background is always important. Before you start anything, it is very necessary to know the background, how things happened, what make what forces were behind the things, and how all these things, whatever we are going to study, like um, translation, particularly translation became very important genre in literature nowadays. um, the original writers are not given that much important the way translators are given importance. Even translated books are winning different prestigious awards. So translation has become very important genre in 21st century. So that is why it is necessary to understand what background forced literature to reach such a stage like this, where translation is very paramount, very massively used, practiced by the authors and translators. So first block is about background studies. You have to study the background of Indian literature in translation, in English translation. Okay. Uh, the first unit of block one in the background studies, the first unit you have is the concept of Indian literature. The first block is about the background studies, but onwards after block one, that means in block 2, block 3, block 4 up to block 8, you have texts, interesting texts, novels, drama, poetry, such stories. All these things you will find and will be very interesting to study. The text is also given along with, I think, given to you in the materials. It is attached to the material, the anthology, Indian contemporary Indian literature in English translation and anthology. Is it provided to you or not? Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If it is provided,
Yes.
you have the prescribed text, whatever is given, all the such stories and whatever is given, you can easily read the text. Read the text so that you can enjoy the charm of translation. Translation is actually a very important part of life today, important factor of literature. Anyhow, we'll go directly to block one. It is very long, we cannot cover everything. In block one, you have background studies, you have four chapters, four units. First unit is concept of Indian literature. Before we start literature being translated into English, we have to know what literature was there in India, what kind of literature we find in India, in ancient India, in modern India, in postmodern India. Now we are in the postmodern period. After independence, we are in postmodern era. So in postmodern era, what kind of literature is present for translation? And before independence, in the colonizing period, when we are in a colony, so at that time, what kind of literature were being produced, and before Britishers came, means in the ancient India, what kind of literature were there, starting from the Vedic civilization, from the Vedas, Upanishads, from there to today, what kind of literature we have. That is concept of Indian literature. You have to understand all the literature produced from Vedic civilization till date, till date, what kind of literature have been produced in India. This is the concept of Indian literature. You have to understand Indian literature, in which you find both prose, poetry, stories, novels, dramas, everything, travel writing, autobiography, everything comes under this, written by both male and female writers. Uh, these are the concept of Indian literature in brief. We will go in detail, but I am just giving you a bird's eye look view of the unit. Second unit is about modern Indian literature. It's about the 20th century and 21st century only. The concept of modern literature, modern Indian literature, the modern period. Okay, modern period actually starts with the arrival of East India Company in India. So we'll discuss it later in details. But this is the concept of modern literature. How? Because ancient literature was limited, very least in number, is not that much that we find today. So that's why after ancient, we'll direct go to modern literature. We'll discuss that. And unit 3 is comparative studies in India. This is a separate study. Comparative studies is also that you are pursuing post graduation in English, like that you have post graduation in comparative literature. You have post graduation, you can have research and comparative studies. So comparative study is a school of means you can school of study, you can say, like translation, like uh, linguistics. Okay, comparative studies is also a field of study, is a school of study like English. So that is why it is very important. We will give simple analysis of what comparative study actually mean in India and how it is related to translation. And the last unit is English translation of Indian literature. Okay, this is also from the beginning till date. Whatever texts have been translated in English of Indian text, whatever Indian text have been translated into English language. Okay, so you find this is a very means a long chapter unit, you can say. So still we will try to look at all these chapters, but it is not easy to cover in 1 hour all these things. But still we'll try our best. So coming to the unit one, first unit, this is the concept of Indian literature. Okay, the concept of Indian literature, it is very important. All of you should know what is the concept of Indian literature. So when we talk about literature, okay, we are of terms two terms, Indian literature and literature in India. India is a different country. You all know about India. India is completely different. Okay, uh, we sometimes call India as a subcontinent because of the diversity. We find thousands of cultures existing together in India. We find a lot of cultures here, a lot of languages, a lot of literature. So, language determines your culture, and culture, language together produce literature. So, literature in this way, you find a lot of literature in India. So, in the morning class, I was telling about this. Some of you may not be present. Indian literature means literature produced in India, but literatures in India means all the regional literatures that are produced in India, and uh, we say literatures in India, Indian literatures and literatures in India. We find these two terms, and we find many literature in India. Okay, linguistic. There are a lot of linguistic cultures. Okay, we find subcultures also. Subcultures means culture and a subculture. Suppose if you take Odia as a culture, Odisha as a state, we find culture Odisha has not a single culture. If you go to the tribal area, you find a separate kind of celebration, separate kind of god, goddess, holidays, festivals. You find different things. So in for example, uh, recently you got the holiday Makar Sankranti on January 14th. So this day is celebrated all over India, but the way of celebration is different everywhere. Even in Odisha also, you find people celebrating in different ways. Okay, so that is why it is important to see how linguistic culture or culture in India and subculture that is found in a culture. Culture and subculture means culture, a part of the main culture. If Odia is Odisha is a culture, Odia concept of Odia is a culture, you find in between the tribal societies, Sambalpuri culture. You find in Kalahandi and other districts, you find different cultures. In Khurda and Ganjam, Barampur having a link with Andhra Pradesh, and Sambalpur and Jharsuguda and other districts having link with Chhattisgarh. So you find mixing culture there. So you have completely different cultures in inside a single state, Odisha. If you talk about other states like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, those areas, they have different. Southern India, we say, South Indian states, we say, they have different kind of culture, they have different kind of language. Okay, so this linguistic culture altogether um, makes Indian literature a complex literature. You cannot understand unless you have sufficient knowledge about a particular culture. If you are learning any book written by a Kannada writer, you must understand Kannada culture well. Otherwise, a lot of ceremonies, a lot of festivals, a lot of celebrations, you cannot understand what exactly they are saying. For example, when a child is born, we celebrate. When a child is when a person, a girl is getting married, we celebrate. We celebrate in different ways, in different occasions. So that kind of celebration you will find all over India, vary from person to place to place, from culture to culture, from community to community. So that is why India produce literature in every part of its corner. Everywhere you go, you will find Indian culture, uh, a particular regional culture. So all the regional cultures have their own literature. So if you try to understand Indian literature as a whole, it is very difficult, very complex. Okay, so there is culture versus literature. You find different cultures, and different literatures are produced, because culture reflects, whatever culture reflects is also found in literature. Literature is nothing but a reflection of the society and culture. Whatever happens in the society and the culture gets reflected in literature. That is literature. And the second thing is the idea of India as a nation. So if you think about India as a nation, you have to go back to the Vedic civilization. Okay, from there up to East India Company, India was in a different way. Okay, so India is different. So if you take India during the non-British, means in the time of monarchy, when Rajas and Maharajas were ruling, the things, the culture, everything was different at that time. It was very rich. We say India has a very rich culture. Today we are proud of that. But that was before the arrival of European culture, European people to India. So when they came, when Sultanate came, when Muslims came, when Mughals came, okay, all these people, they influenced our culture, and we have changed our culture a lot. Anyhow, in order to understand India as a nation, if you go back to the history, you find that India is a country of many states, many kingdoms. It was kingdoms before, now we say states. Today, we have a very limited number of states, but if you go to the history, you find innumerable numbers of states in India. Small, big, very big. During Mahabharata, period of Mahabharata, you may see how many kingdoms were there, how many rajas are there. So that was a kind of situation in India. So later on, we find colonialism came. Colonialism means when colonizers came, Britishers, French, Dutch, they came and they colonized India. They have their colony in India. And after that, we got independence. So after independence, we are in a different state of psychology, different state of imagination, different set of mind. During colonization, we have a different set of mind, and we produced that kind of literature. After independence, we developed a different kind of literature. Again, something happened: partition. Twice we find India got parted. First Pakistan and then Bangladesh. So India got separated. India was divided. So that is why it is necessary that during this three period, I said ancient period, colonization, independence, and partition. These are the four stages you find India undergoing different experiences as a nation. But still, today, even when India got independence, in discovery of India, Jawaharlal Nehru said, "We find unity in diversity. We are diverse people. We have diverse culture. We have diverse mentality. We have diverse patterns of dresses, food, society. Um, all the things are different. Language, but still we love our motherland. We call Bharat Mata. We say Bharat Mata, and we all are Indians, and we find unity in diversity. So that was something about Indian nation, you can say. So during that period, during the recent years of independence, after independence, we find two kind of languages fighting. Pathans, we say Arabic and Prakrit, Urdu, that kind of language, and Tamil language. They were very outstanding, means very prominent languages at that time. And anyhow, we managed to make a synthesis of foreign influences. Whatever French people taught us, whatever English people taught us, we managed to make a synthesis, and we found two kinds of society. One is urban India, and other one is rural Bharat. Rural Bharat, who are very ignorant of what is going on the city, these trending situations, changing times, science and discoveries. These are dreams for them, those who live in rural Bharat. But those who live in urban India, we find people being very highly educated, highly talented, having lots of knowledge, and they have mastered. They went to foreign countries for their high studies. So things are different. And then uh, the idea of reading Indian literature in translation is to understand the various linguistic culture that constitute India. India has different, I said, different cultures. They constitute together India. And if you want to understand Indian literature, you need to understand the nation well, Indian cultures well, Indian linguistics well. So once you understand all these things, then easily you can understand Indian literature. So coming now to ancient Indian literature. So ancient means, we know when we say ancient, definitely you may think about Ramayana and Mahabharata and Sanskrit language. So ancient literature means literature that we find in the very ancient time. That is Ramayana, Mahabharata, Vedas, Upanishads, Bhakti movement literature. All these things. Mostly these literature were oral and written in the manuscript. Those who were writing, they were writing in the manuscript in the on the palm leaves using uh, iron pens. You must have seen lekhani, we say. Using that lekhani, they are writing on the palm leaves, and that was called manuscripts. So that manuscripts were used as books, you can say. They were used as books, and that was stored. And you can understand, if you talk about um, palm leaves, the durability of palm leaves, you can easily understand. And it was very, uh, you cannot conserve it. Means if you use it regularly, you cannot expect it is very durable. You can store it for 50 years or 100 years. But still, there was no other options. They used to write. The ancient literature was mostly oral. Anyhow, um, uh, Ancient literature does not mean only literature in Sanskrit. You can think about that. I said Vedas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad, many things that we say, they are written in Sanskrit, and we may think that ancient literature means literature in Sanskrit. No, that is not. You can find an equal language like Tamil. Tamil is a very ancient language having ancient literal outputs. Okay, so you can also find Prakrit, Prakrit language, also next to Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, all languages. You have seven classical languages today. Even Odia also is a classical language, and Bengali, which is not a classical language but still has a very rich ancient history of literary production. Bengali, you can find, you will see in the second unit. We'll discuss how Bengali writers like Rabindranath Tagore got Nobel Prize for writing poetry, Gitanjali, and Gitanjali was translated into English, and then he got the Nobel Prize. Anyhow, uh, means that literature was also very, uh, uh, you know, uh, very prominent and very profound. So, literature does not mean, or language does not mean only Sanskrit if you talk about ancient literature. It was all languages, and most important languages were Sanskrit, Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, all these languages are important languages. This is about ancient Indian literature. If you come to Middle Indian literature, next phase, if you divide the phases, you have ancient, middle, and the modern. Ancient, we talked about ancient Ramayana, Mahabharata, Vedas, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad, and Bhakti movement literature. They come under ancient literature. If you talk about Indian, Middle Indian literature, we see that Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are written actually in Sanskrit, got translated. They were translated into various languages. Like it was, Ramayana was translated into Malayalam as Ramacharitam. Okay, you find in Odia also, though it is not translation, you cannot say it is translation. Sarala Das also translated Mahabharata, but this is not translation, because translation is actually um, uh, using turning writing the same thing in different language. But Sarala Das resaid the story. Resaid means he did not translate, he said the story again in Odia language. So that is why it is not translation. But still, you can see that the same Mahabharata, the story of Mahabharata, whatever is written in Sanskrit, got a different shape in the hands of, in the words of Sarala Das, in a different literature like Odia. So in Malayalam language, Ramayana was translated, Ramayana was presented like Ramacharitam. Okay, Madhava Parikar, okay, Rama Parikar, Shankar Parikar, the Panikar, sorry, Madhav Panikar, Rama Panikar, Shankar Panikar. These are the Panikar poets. They are called the Niranam poets. Okay, Niranam poets in Malayalam. They composed Ramayana Mahabharata, formation of Ramayana Mahabharata. They rewrote Ramayana and Mahabharata, translated it. In Bhakti movement also, we find a lot of ancient text got different steps, okay, in different languages. Mahabharata was written in Sanskrit by Kavi Vyasa or Vyasadev, we know. But later, Mahabharata was written in all the regional cultures. You say Telugu, Marathi, Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam, Bengali, Odia, Hindi, Bihari, Rajasthani, all Bhojpuri, in all languages, you find a version of Ramayana and Mahabharata and other Vedic stories that we know about, all the gods and goddesses related to religion. We find they have their own stories, they have their own literature about this. So this is the Middle Indian literature you are going to going through the concept of Indian literature, how Indian literature was at that time. Okay, so now we'll go to the next point, that is the modern Indian, uh, concept of Indian literature in modern period. Okay, so this is also very important. Okay, here we find a change in the sense, in the ancient time or in the middle time, we find that people are writing the same thing in different languages, giving different shapes to the stories, but here we find different things. Means a lot of different genres got introduced. Means if you come to 19th century, we find that printing press was introduced. Printing press, I said, in the ancient time manuscripts were the only way of writing, otherwise it was transmitted orally. But in 19th century, the beginning of 19th century, after the arrival of the British East India Company, when did they came? Have anyone any knowledge when exactly Britishers consolidated their stand in India? Which was the turning point of East India Company in India? They consolidated their stand. Anyone? Any idea? It is 1757. In 1757, after the defeat by Siraj-ud-Dowla in the Battle of Plassey, Robert Clive cleverly occupied the most important Bengal division, West Bengal. At that time, Bengal division was there, and that was the turning point. Anyhow, in 1757, West Bengal, or today West Bengal, at that time Bengal, only Bengal, including Bihar and Odisha. Okay, Bihar and Odisha, Bengal. These three territories were one at that time. So when this was the largest and most rich area, means state at that time, kingdom at that time. Anyhow, towards the middle part of 18th century, they consolidated their stand. But when you find after towards the end of 18th century, their stand was complete, and they were the rulers of India at that time, and they were arbitrarily making laws. Different laws have been subsidiary alliances, doctrine of lapse, a lot of rules they have introduced, and they have done according to their own wish arbitrarily. Anyhow, in 19th century, you find that literature getting means getting different, taking different shapes. So printing press was introduced. That way of writing in palm leaves, that was outdated. When Britishers came, they also came with the printing press. So the printing press was established. Okay, and literature was printed in the paper. So when you talk about introduction of British press, it is because of British and missionary presence. Missionary means the missionary of Christian religious people, those who wanted to convert Indians in order to propagate Christianity. They wanted to reach every Indian Bible. The story of the Bible should be known. You must have I means experience of watching stories of Bible, how Jesus Christ was crucified, how Jesus Christ was the supreme God. That is why they tried to propagate their religion, and because of them, printing press also came to India. The first printing press was introduced into India by the Portuguese in 16th century, and that was not how means updated. That was a very means the Gutenberg type of printing. That was not good enough. This is the same, means you have to make all the letters, and together you have to press on the paper, and it will be printed. That was very difficult. But the updated modern printing press, okay, it was with the establishment of the Serampore printing press in Bengal in 1800. That printing came into its own. the press could publish in various Indian languages. That press was capable of doing that. It was first established in West Bengal in 1800. So that was the printing press. With the beginning of 19th century, you have the printing press. So you can imagine that writing was encouraged by the establishment of printing press. People, those who think of writing, for this sake of writing and keeping with you, you cannot make copies, you cannot sell, you cannot reach your writing to other people, because you have to write one copy and you have to keep it with you, you cannot share it. So when printing press came, writers, authors were encouraged. Okay, this is a turning point. And the language situation, that is most important. When in the morning class I was telling about how English language came into India, that was MEG-10, English studies in India. So that is a different chapter. But now a little bit of that also you must know, that language, English language came to India. We are talking about Indian literature being translated into English language. Okay, you can translate Indian literature to any other language also, that is translation, simple translation. But English translation is different. We are talking about English translation. We can find Odia text being translated into Bengali, Bengali text, Bengali novels translated into Odia, Telugu movies dubbed in Odia, dubbed in Hindi. So that is our internal matter, translating in different other languages, regional languages. But English is an international language. When you translate something in English, you have a window, you have opened a window to the world. The world can see everything through that window. So that is why we are talking about English language. It came in 1835 with the efforts of Macaulay and William Bentinck. At that time, the viceroy, William Bentinck, he introduced English language, mostly for their own self, but gradually we found, at the end, we find that this is very much beneficial for the Indians. They did not, they got kicked out because of this English language only. Anyhow, we are not going to that. But English language was introduced in India in the education system. Okay, then English language became compulsory. After English language became compulsory, um, English language was learnt by most of the Indians, those who study in schools and colleges. Okay, and after independence, you find that universities made English medium compulsory, and those who pursue higher studies, they learnt English anyhow. So this is how English became very famous, very prominent language in India. Okay, and the situation was very complex indeed, and yet in terms of hierarchy between languages among different groups, there was a stable pattern. The hierarchy manifest itself, means if you talk about different languages that existed in India, there was a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy of languages. So though we give certain importance to Sanskrit, we say Sanskrit is the most important language. Sometimes we also heard people saying that Sanskrit is the mother of all other regional languages in India, but certain people, they did not agree with it. Okay, so uh, English among other religious regional languages of India emerged. English became prominent. This is how a language. Now you can see that when printing press came, when books were printed, it reached larger numbers of people. When people learnt English, they have a lot of scope. They got books, newly introduced books. They have never seen books like that. So the curiosity to read encouraged them to read more and more. So mostly the books were printed in English. When it was printed in English, English became a fascinated language for most of the readers. And because of the development of journalism, newspapers and journals, which was became a means a daily affair. You have to read newspaper daily. So that is also another factor by which people means a reading public altogether, like 18th century. If you read British novel, the rise of English novel, you must have the idea how in 18th century England a reading public emerged. Okay, when primary education became compulsory in England, if you have read, I'm not going to that, but the same kind of thing happened in India also. People in India, they found that a reading public means a group of people, those who are very fond of reading, whatever they find, they start reading. So that is also as a whole means help English language to flourish. So and when you find literature being translated into English, suppose when a Bible is difficult, or suppose um, uh, if you talk about Odyssey, like Iliad, by Greek literatures, very important Greek literature, Troy, city of Troy, many literary episodes you have in history, which are very important. You cannot understand Greek language, so Latin language, you cannot understand them. But once it was translated, it was easy, and everybody, those who have access to English, have the chance to look at all the literature across the globe. Okay, so that is why it was very important. Up to 1857, something happened in 1857. I have already told that the Great Mutiny, the first war of independence, happened in 1857 in India. It happened after 100 years of dominance. Like I said, in 1757, after the defeat of Siraj Uddaula in the Battle of Plassey, India lost its most precious land to the East India Company. Okay, that was the turning point, and after that, India was completely captured by the British government, British East India Company. 1757, and in 1857, exactly after 100 years, we find an opposition, a counter attack uh, to the British government. That was the Great Revolt, the Great Revolt of 1857, in which uh, something happened, and India, there was a nationalistic feelings, and India, after that we find a lot of movements by Mahatma Gandhi and others, and at last we got independence. That is not the matter. Matter is that up to 1957, the type of literature were different. Okay, the literature was mostly colonized literature, literature of suppression, literature of exploitation, literature of different other cultures coming to India, Indian culture changing. That was the concept of the theme of literature. But after 1857, nationalistic literature came to being. You will find literature, Indian literature being nationalistic. You find literature being full of patriotic feelings. People wanted to means revoke the people, make them feel very proud of their country, and they should hate the Britishers, and they should kick out the British government from India. That was the concept, and for which means this type of literature came into being in 19th century, just after the Great Indian Revolt. And the second important thing is the birth of the novel. Birth of novel means novel was not a genre before that. Okay, in 1857, the first World War, also first war of independence over, and after that, novel became a genre. The first uh, novel was in Bengali. Okay, remember, Alaler Gharer Dulal. Alaler Gharer Dulal is a novel in Bengali, was first written by Piari Chand Mitra in 1814. Uh, means it was written by a Bengali writer. Okay, he wrote it in a pseudonym. Okay, in a name, disguised name, Techand Thakur. This was a novel first published in Bengali, and the novel as a genre you find in 18th century. England, we find this novel being introduced. Before earlier to that, there was no novel. You find sort of prose pieces. John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. That was a now we can say that is a novel, but at that time it was a prose piece. It was not a novel because novel was not known to the people. Novel was not a concept. Okay, so it came later. After novel came short story. Short story was also not known to the people. When novel came, after that followed short story. Means a very shorter version of novel is called a short story. So now you have micro stories. You have micro stories. 2 line, 3 line stories are also available in English and regional languages in India. So that was the first novel, you can say. Um, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee wrote the first novel in English. Okay, in 1864, he wrote Rajmohan's Wife, first novel in English. Also, he was also a Bengali. So, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee wrote the first novel in English, first Indian novel in English. So, you can understand the situation how Indian literature, the concept of Indian literature is going on, the concept of modern Indian literature is going on, how modern literature came into being. So this is about the novel Ananda Matha. Okay, means Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay wrote Ananda Matha, Vande Mataram. The song Vande Mataram came in that. Okay, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was very famous. Vande Mataram song today that you sing, it came from that novel, Anandamat, you must know, in 1882. But perhaps the most famous of all Bengali writers is, you can guess, Rabindranath Tagore. He is very famous writer, and he got also Nobel Prize in Nobel Prize in 1930. So you can see Rajarsi, Bouthak, Kuranir, Hat, a lot of Bengali names you cannot easily take the names at a glance, so it is difficult. Anyhow, Bengali novels, Bengali writers, they introduce a new genre to Indian literary arena. Okay, so after Bengali, you find other novels also in different other in Marathi. Also, Mochanga is a novel by R.B. Gunjankar. Okay, Hari Narayan Apte began writing his social novel in 1885. Marathi writers, so they also started writing. Okay, in Gujarati also, Karan Ghelo, okay, is a novel. Nanda Sankar Mehta wrote in 1866. First novel in Urdu was uh, Miratul Urus. Miratul Urus by Nazir Ahmad is a first novel in Urdu. Okay, so you find a lot of novels in different. India has many languages. All of them started adopting that particular genre novel. The first novel in Telugu was Rangaraja Charita by Gopal Krishnam Cheti. In Telugu also they started writing novels. In Tamil also, there the first novel published in 1879, Pratap Mudaliar Charitam. Okay, Charitram by Samuel Vedanayakam Pillai in 1879. It's the first novel in Tamil. So we find different languages having their own novels introduced during this period in the modern period. Okay, so in Punjabi also they have their own novel Sundari, written by Bhai Veer Singh. Okay, in 1897. So the novel became very famous. Then come to poetry. What was the condition of poetry? So Bengali, it's not about Bengali. Bengali were not the first to write poems. As Bengali introduced novel, you cannot say that Bengali is also introduced poetry. No, it's about Gujarati. So Gujarati introduced poetry in India. So if you talk about real, in a real sense, poetry came as a genre in Kavi Dalpatram Dahai Bhai. in Gujarat. Okay, he wrote about modernity. In his first poem was Bapani Pipar in Gujarati. You cannot understand if you know Gujarati, you can understand what the title exactly mean. But that was the title, Bapani Pipar in 1845. So this means this is in their regional language, not in English. How genres came into being in India gradually. First, you see, we talk about novel. Now it is about poetry. Okay, in Bengal also we find a lot of Bengali poets. They wrote poetry like Mitchell, Madhusudan Datta. Okay, Meghanad Vadha Kavya was a famous poetry in Bengali. Okay, in Odia also we find Radhanath Rai, Kedar Gauri, Nandikeshwari. Okay, these are the poems we find in Odisha also written by Radhanath Rai. Is a modern poet. Poems were there, but these poems are modern poems, taking the themes of Western cultures. Western cultures, whatever how they are open to physical relations, they are very much means open in all aspects of life. So those things, incest kind of relation was very, you cannot even take the word in front of Indian culture. If you say, people will hate you like anything. They say anything to you. You don't know decency, you have no common sense like this. But these things were also included in poetry. Kedar Gauri, Chandrabhaga, Nandikeshwari. Uh, it's about Odisha. I am talking about Odisha. Even Madhusudan Rai was also there. He also wrote a lot of poems in Odia. And then comes drama. Drama also, that is also another genre. Drama is another genre. So here also you find the drama also flourished in India. When Shakespeare, it's interesting to see that the change that took place in India, Indian drama, Indian theater, with the arrival of Shakespeare and other English plays. Okay, and the introduction of the drama to the theater, to the auditorium, that came with Shakespeare, and other playwrights. When we were there were a number of translations from Shakespeare in different languages. Many different Shakespearean plays, tragedies, comedies were translated into English. So we find that drama became very familiar in India. And before that, drama was not a genre, so-called very important genre in India. Ramanavami, Assamese play by Guna Biram Barua, which is about widow remarriage, was written in 1857. Well, this was a social tragedy. A number of light plays, farce means a comic type of plays, comedies were also written soon after in Assamese. So Assamese, you can say, they pioneered this genre of writing drama, writing plays. Okay, Hemchand Barua wrote Kantyar Kirtan is also another. The evil effect of opium. Opium, you must know, opium. Uh, about that theme, this Kantyar Kirtan is a play by Hemchandra uh, Barua. Okay, so you find different other dramas also. We are not going to discuss. You go through the materials, you can find easily all these things. In the 21st century, again after the 20th century came 21st century, we have also the same kind of means more number of literary productions we find in India, in all regional, in Bengali, in Odia, in Tamil, in Telugu, in almost all the important languages in India, we find a great number of literary production, both in novel, poetry, and drama. All the names and novelist, name of the writers, you can find. We cannot discuss all. So this is the second chapter, and the third unit we say comparative study. Comparative study means it is very important also. Uh, have you all written your names and roll numbers? It's important. So we'll discuss about comparative studies in India. It is very important. I said that it is a field of study, it is a school of study. Comparative study means when one or more literature in relation to one another is studied together. When we study, when there is a study of more than one literature in relation to one another. When we study, suppose one literature, suppose Paraja is a literature. It is translated into different languages, including English, by Gopinath Mahanti in Odisha. You must have heard Paraja has been translated into English, okay, by Bikram K. Mahanti. Bikram K. Das has translated it, and you may find different other translations also. And sometimes a book is translated by many translators in the same languages. You can find also. That is comparative literature, when we compare different versions of a text. When we find a same story, the story is same, but the style of presentation, the syntax, the emotions, and the imagination presented in the text are different, because authors varies from each other, one another. So if you say, there was a movie in Bollywood. I forgot the name title. It is based on Macbeth. Uh, not Macbeth. Uh, um, Hamlet. Sorry, Hamlet. It's based on Hamlet. The hero was Shahid Kapoor. I don't remember the title of the movie. Means released some years ago, 4, 5 or 6 years ago. Uh, I forgot the name. So that is a different version of Hamlet. Hamlet, the same story has been narrated or means visualized, but with a little twist at some points. So that is called comparative literature, when you find two versions of the same story written by different authors, or multiple versions of the same story written by different authors, and you study them and find out the differences, the analysis of how the characters are posed, what emotions they said, they gave, all like this is called comparative study. And in translation particularly, you find that, suppose I wrote something and you translated it. So when I made a particular character, whatever I have in my mind you may not have. When I put a character in a particular situation, I may have something different in my mind, in comparison to you as the translator. So when the translator and authors are posed together, you cannot find the same story in the translated one. Okay, so translation, sometimes Aristotle said, or Arnold also, Matthew Arnold also said, that poetry, if translated, had no soul, means without soul. So the soul of the poetry in the text cannot be maintained if it is translated, because the original poet, the author, knows what exactly he is going to narrate. And when we just read the poem and translate it, we are translating one version of the appreciation. Appreciation of poetry varies from readers to reader. A translator is first a reader. He has to read the poem, she has to read the prose, and after reading, whatever he or she understood will be reflected in his or her translation. So that is why translation is a replication of one's own appreciation, or you can say analysis of a particular text. So that is why it is necessary to understand how means comparative studies are important. So that is why comparative study, comparative literature came into being, that you have to see the literature and compare them, because they are not the same. When two things are same, there is nothing to compare, but when two things are different, you must compare. So like that, with the advent of translation, also the same comparative literature came. So I'm not going to say more about comparative studies. English translation in Indian literature. So a lot of translations done in different literatures of India, from all the regional literatures, all the regional cultures. We find a lot of important, like Jagyaseni by Pratibha Rai in Odisha. You must have known that she got the Jnanapith Award for that book. It was written in Odia, and when it was translated into English, she got the prestigious award. And why that happened? Because it is important. So that is why you should understand that how literature, when reached a lot of people, how it becomes very important, how it gives you a lot of awards. So this is the end of the class block 1, background studies. You got the basic knowledge about the background on which translation came and how translated text that you are going to, we will from block 2 we will discuss different text, translated text, just like samskar, then short stories. We have a lot of short stories, poems, all translated one. And this background will help you a lot to understand it. Okay. If you have any question, you can ask. Otherwise, we will wind up. The next class of MEG 6 will start hereafter. So if you have anybody has any queries to ask, you are free to ask. I hope you have all mentioned your name and roll number. That will be very important. And now it's time to wind up. Anybody has any queries?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Now I'll close the um, class. We'll stop the recording. And those who have MEG uh, 6, no, sorry, MEG 7, they are informed to join the link, the respective link given. MEG 7, I think, MEG 7. Okay. The class will be taken by Dr. Aditya Meher. So be ready. So I'll stop the recording. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.